Oh boy, where do I even begin with this story? It's like a punch to the gut, you know? So meet our main character. Let's call him Alex. At his own brother's wedding, can you believe it? They didn't just forget to save him a seat. No, they went full-on scorched earth on his entire existence. In front of what felt like a million people, Alex's own father dropped a bomb. He wasn't even theirs. He declared no warning, no shame, just a wave of cruel laughter washing over Alex. It was like they erased him right there in that moment. But the real kicker, the gut-wrenching truth that they'd been rewriting his story for years. Those little lies, the deafening silence, and now that Alex had finally found his voice, they were scrambling to shut him down. Ever felt that kind of betrayal, that cold shoulder from your own blood? Buckle up, because Alex is about to show us what happened next. He slid the keys into the ignition of his beat-up car, a sense of grim determination hardening his gaze. For the first time in 20 long years, Alex didn't wait for permission, didn't flinch at the phantom hand that always seemed ready to stop him. The air conditioning wheezed its last breaths as he backed out of the country club parking lot, the headlights cutting through a thick haze of pollen and the encroaching twilight. Behind him, the wedding party raged on those fairy lights shimmering in his rearview mirror like distant, unattainable stars. Strangely, no tears came. Not yet. Alex drove in a suffocating silence, his jaw clenched so tight he could practically hear the bones grinding. His fingers trembled against the steering wheel, the sound of his father's voice, that casual cruelty echoing in his head. "We picked him up literally off someone else's porch," he'd said with a booming laugh, like it was some charming family anecdote. Not a verbal grenade that had just blown a gaping hole through Alex's chest in front of 200 wedding guests. Of course, the car's low fuel light blinked on, adding insult to injury. Alex pulled into a rundown gas station on the very edge of town, the kind where the flickering sign buzzed louder than the ancient pumps. He didn't bother going inside. He just needed to sit to draw a ragged breath. His phone buzzed, "Mom." He let it ring, the sound a shrill accusation. Again it rang. This time it was Maya, his sister. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" Her voicemail snapped, dripping with ice. "This is Ben's big night. Don't make it about you." "About me," Alex scoffed, the sound hollow in the stale car air. He leaned back, letting his head fall against the worn seat. The memory of the reception crashed over him, a physical blow, everyone clapping as his father toasted Ben. Maya's beaming, oblivious smile, as if nothing earth-shattering had just occurred. Not a single person had spoken up for him. Not one. Especially not Maya. The picture of perfection, the golden child who never put a foot wrong. But she had known, hadn't she? The sideways glances, the nervous laughter. She'd been in on it. Alex turned off the ignition. The silence inside the car roared louder than any wedding music. Was he even surprised? He thought back to last Thanksgiving. He'd spent the entire day slaving away in the kitchen while everyone else laughed over board games and football. When he finally sat down to eat his plate, was stone cold, no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. He was always the helper, the fixer, the "can you grab that girl?" Not a daughter, not a sister, just available. He remembered that flat tire years ago on the way home from his second job. No one answered his frantic calls. Ben called back 3 days later, not to ask if he was okay, but to announce his engagement and demand Alex's help. Finding a photographer. Yeah, this wasn't some new development. The wedding had just thrown a harsh spotlight on the truth. Alex had been desperately trying to ignore for years. He wasn't family, not to them. His phone buzzed again, a text from Lisa, another sister. "Hey, sorry about earlier, but you know Dad's just like that. He doesn't mean anything by it." That line, that dismissive shrug that families weaponize to excuse the inexcusable, that's just how he is. Alex typed and deleted a dozen furious replies before finally tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. He didn't owe them an explanation. He didn't owe them anything. For 20 years, he'd twisted himself into whatever shape they needed, canceled vacations, skipped birthdays, lent money he knew he'd never see again. He'd held their babies, cooked their meals, cleaned up their messes that weren't his. And still, they'd made damn sure there was no seat for him at their precious table. The night had deepened, the oppressive heat giving way to a cooler breeze. Alex cracked the window, staring up at the moon, full and bright, as if daring to shine down on such a desolate night. What now? The thought barely formed before an old memory surfaced, a whisper from Grandma Evie years ago, just before she passed. "You don't have to earn your place, Cal," she'd said, her voice frail but firm. "Not in a real family. Real love doesn't come with conditions." At the time, Alex had thought she was just being sweet. Now he wondered if she was the only one who had ever truly seen what was happening. He started the car again. He didn't know his destination, but it wouldn't be back to that house. Not tonight, maybe not ever. A green highway sign flickered in the distance, northbound. Maybe it was finally time to follow that road trip he'd always dreamed of. The one he kept pushing back because someone always needed him for something. Maybe it was time he stopped being needed and started being known. As he merged onto the freeway, the faint strains of wedding music faded completely behind him. He adjusted the rearview mirror not to check for traffic, but to look at himself. Still here, still breathing, still him, whatever they thought, whatever lies they clung to about where he came from. He would decide where he went next. And this time, he wouldn't ask for their directions. By the time the dashboard clock blinked past 11:42 p.m., Alex was somewhere on the northwest side of the city. The gaudy wedding lights a distant memory. He didn't have a specific destination in mind. All he knew was that home, the house he'd grown up in, was the last place he could bear to be. Not tonight, not after the casual cruelty of his father's words and the chilling indifference of everyone else who'd let it slide, as if it were nothing more than a harmless joke at his expense. The roads were eerily empty, the yellow streetlights pulsing over the hood of his truck, each flicker pressing against his raw thoughts. The windshield reflected his face, tight-lipped, wide-eyed, a stranger staring back. He looked like someone who had finally reached the absolute limit of what he could give. And for the first time in his life, Alex wasn't afraid of that emptiness. He pulled into a Shell station near Fredericksburg Road, one of those desolate 24-hour stops where the lights are too bright and the silence too loud. Parking under a buzzing lamp, he simply sat, his hands resting motionless on the steering wheel. His thoughts swirled like oil slick on water, confused, bitter, and then suddenly still. What was he if not their helper, their fallback plan, the stand-in parent, the errand girl, the one who always showed up even when he wasn't wanted? A vibration broke the stillness. He didn't even glance at the screen, just stared as the name blinked up, Mom. The buzzing stopped, then started again. This time he answered. He didn't know why. Maybe a tiny, foolish part of him still clung to the hope of something real. "Sweetheart," his mother's voice chirped through the phone. Sugary and rushed. "Can you come back to the venue? Maya's stressing out. We need someone to take the kids back to the hotel." Silence filled the cab of his truck. "You know how hectic these things get," she added, a soft, dismissive chuckle, as if nothing monumental had just shattered. "You've always been so good with the little ones." Alex didn't say a word. "And it's getting late. You were always the one who could settle them down when they got cranky." That was it. No apology, no mention of his father's public humiliation. Not even a perfunctory, "Are you okay?" Just a request for his unpaid labor. She hung up before he could even formulate a response. Not that he had anything left to say. His mother wasn't calling to comfort him. She was calling because someone needed to do the thankless job, and Alex had always been the one too polite, too desperate for a scrap of belonging to refuse. He leaned back in the seat, head tilted toward the ceiling. His eyes burned, but no tears came. Not yet. Then another notification lit up his phone, a text from Lisa. It looked like it was meant for the family group thread. "If she doesn't come back by tomorrow, I'll just get someone else. We can't afford drama right now." Alex stared at it, rereading every word. His name wasn't even there, just she, like he wasn't a person, just a problem to be solved or better yet, replaced. They hadn't thought he'd see it, they didn't care if he did. He set the phone down in his lap, letting out a slow, shaking breath. That message, that casual dismissal, did something the public humiliation hadn't managed. It flipped a switch in his brain, the one that had always desperately sought excuses for their behavior. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they're just stressed. Maybe they're just joking. No, they meant it. Every word, every silence, every sidelong glance, they all meant it. Alex's mind replayed every single time he'd stepped in, every wedding he'd helped plan, every birthday party he'd catered, every debt he'd quietly paid off when someone couldn't cover rent or utilities. Maya sobbing in his arms during her second divorce while he rocked her baby. Lisa constantly asking for rides to appointments, help with her taxes, her mortgage paperwork. Not once had they truly thanked him. It was always assumed Alex can handle it. Alex has time. Alex doesn't mind. They didn't see him. They saw a service. He rubbed at his temples, a dull ache spreading behind his eyes. His apartment wasn't far. When he got there, he tossed the keys onto the kitchen counter and headed straight for the small hallway closet. He pulled out his old duffel bag, faded green, still faintly smelling of the cedar blocks he'd thrown in years ago. He didn't think he just started grabbing what he needed: 2 pairs of jeans, a stack of folded t-shirts, his worn boot socks shoved haphazardly under things. His fingers moved with a grim purpose. It was like his body had already made the decision and the rest of him was just catching up. From a shelf overhead, he took down a battered envelope, the one where he kept tip money and leftover paychecks he hadn't deposited just in case. He'd never known what the case would be, but now he did. In his bedroom, he paused. On the dresser sat an old photo in a tarnished silver frame, Alex at 16 braces and all standing awkwardly between his parents. He was holding a certificate from school, some honor roll thing he barely remembered. What he did remember was how their hands weren't on his shoulders. They stood beside him like he was a neighbor's kid who'd done something mildly impressive. He lifted the frame, his gaze drawn to their faces. His father was already halfway turned toward Maya, who stood just outside the frame. His mother's smile was too tight, too polite. Alex placed the photo face down on the dresser and turned away. Back in the living room, he grabbed his phone and opened a blank message thread with Leora, his cousin, the one person who had always shown him a flicker of genuine kindness. His thumbs hovered for a moment, then typed, "I'm okay, don't look for me. I just need a break." He hit send. Then he searched for outbound buses. There was one leaving from the downtown station at 5:15 a.m., heading northwest. He didn't know exactly where he'd land, but that didn't matter anymore, as long as it wasn't home. The bus pulled out of the station while the sky was still a deep charcoal gray, the world half asleep around him. Alex didn't bother asking the driver when they'd arrive. He didn't care. He just knew he needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else, somewhere the shadows didn't know his name. He took a window seat near the back, the kind you choose when you don't want to make small talk or be seen. He curled into his jacket and leaned against the cold glass, watching San Antonio shrink behind him in flickers of neon and silence. He didn't look at his phone. He powered it off and stuffed it into the bottom of his bag. If anyone wanted him, they'd have to wait. The hum of the wheels against the highway gave his thoughts just enough space to unravel. He didn't think he slept, but he drifted somewhere between exhausted and empty. He watched other passengers board at different stops. College kids, night shift, workers, a woman with a toddler who wouldn't stop crying. None of them looked at him, and for once that was exactly what he wanted. A street sign passed in a blur, something about Oregon. He didn't even register the town name, and that's when it started, that memory. He thought he'd buried too deep to matter. 4 years ago, winter. He was in the garage digging through bins for the Christmas lights. It was freezing. He remembered because his breath came out in little clouds, and his fingers were numb even through his gloves. His father had barked at him to be useful and find the green and gold light strings, the ones Maya liked. Of course he'd opened the wrong box. There it was, a plain manila envelope, thin but heavy with meaning, no label, no markings. He should have put it back right then, but he opened it, inside a stack of paperwork. His name printed on the top sheet, adoption records, legal signatures, a date that didn't match his birthday. He remembered standing there for a full minute, eyes locked on the paper as his ears rang, and then his mother's voice coming from behind him. "You find the lights yet?" He'd shoved the envelope back into the box, closed the lid, and never mentioned it again. That moment had sat inside him like a rock too heavy to carry, too terrifying to throw away. Until now. He blinked back to the present. The bus had stopped at a small-town gas station. People were stretching their legs, buying warm sodas and peanut butter crackers. Alex stayed in his seat. No appetite, just the bitter taste of betrayal coating his tongue. They knew his parents. Lisa, maybe even Ben and Maya. They knew, and they chose silence. No wonder they looked right through him all these years. He wasn't one of them. Not really. Another memory surfaced slower this time. Softer Grandma Evie. In her final days, the last person who treated him like he mattered beyond utility. He remembered sitting at her bedside, her hand resting over his papery but warm. She'd looked at him, her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them, and said, "You've got a quiet strength in you, Cal. Not like them, that's not bad." She'd called it just different. At the time, he'd thought she meant he was more introverted, more measured, maybe a little old-fashioned, but now he wondered if she'd known if she'd wanted to tell him the truth without betraying the ones who raised him. Maybe that was her way of giving him a warning or a blessing. She passed 2 days after that. He never forgot how she looked at him, like he was his own person, not theirs. The bus rolled on, the sky began to lighten, a soft lavender glow stretching over the hills. Alex pulled a tattered notebook from his bag and started scribbling. He didn't know what he was writing, but the words came anyway. I don't belong to them, and maybe that's a gift. The pen paused. His hand was steady. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't reacting. He was deciding. He closed the notebook and leaned back. The window was fogged now, but through it he saw the outline of trees, dense, dark, and unfamiliar. Then a sign appeared in green peeling paint. Welcome to Oregon. Alex sat up straighter as if the seatbelt had just loosened. His pulse didn't race, it slowed. Something uncoiled inside him, a name he hadn't answered to in years. Cal echoed in his head, and for once it sounded like someone worth knowing. He didn't have a plan, not a map, not a job, not a friend within 300 miles. But he had breath. He had space, and he had no one waiting for him to carry their mess. He pressed his hand to the cool window and smiled just barely. It didn't feel like he'd run away. It felt like he'd finally arrived. The wind off the coast hit him like a bracing truth. He hadn't escaped them. He'd finally found himself. But even as his boots touched the wet pavement of Astoria, a quiet fog clinging to the rooftops like secrets that never lifted. He knew he hadn't walked into some fairy tale of reinvention. This wasn't a rebirth. It was survival in a new skin. The town looked like something out of an old postcard. Shingles darkened by rain storefronts with peeling paint. Fishing boats bobbing on gray waves in the distance. It didn't promise anything except solitude. And that was enough. Alex rented a room above a bar that smelled perpetually of whiskey-fried shrimp and many unspoken regrets. The floorboards groaned under every step, and the radiator hissed with what sounded like disapproval, but it was his. No family photos, no expectations, just 4 walls, a window, and a silence that didn't demand explanations. He found work by sheer chance. The cafe was tucked into the corner of a sloped intersection. Small worn, the kind of place locals frequented, not because the coffee was exceptional, but because the owner remembered how you liked it. Era was her name, blunt, wiry, and she stared at Alex for exactly 3 seconds before declaring, "You work clean." He nodded. "You start tomorrow," and that was it. No background check, no reference calls, no what brings you to our little town. She handed him an apron like it was a silent pact, and he took it with both hands. For the first time in his adult life, Alex was just Alex, not his father's son, not his sister's go-to guy, not the family errand runner. No one here knew the weight of that other name. The one tied to a grandmother's deathbed whispers, while his mother busied herself elsewhere. It felt strange and steady all at once. The first week blurred into a rhythm of dish soap, burnt toast, and the regulars' predictable complaints about the relentless Oregon drizzle. He worked the early shifts sweeping behind the counters before the sun even considered breaking through the persistent fog. His breaks were spent in the back alley, watching the gulls squabble over discarded sandwich crusts. That's when he made the mistake. One morning, nursing lukewarm coffee and aching feet, he opened his phone out of sheer habit. He tapped into the family group chat and saw nothing. No new messages, no dumb memes from Lisa, no photo dumps of Maya's seemingly perfect children, no Leora's late-night, "Are you still up?" texts. He scrolled, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. Then he noticed his name wasn't on the group list anymore. He hadn't been muted, he'd been removed. No warning, no explanation, just gone. His thumb hovered over the empty thread, as if willing it to magically repopulate. It didn't. His screen remained blank, the silence more deafening than any argument they'd ever avoided. He checked his individual texts. Only one new message buried under a week's worth of cafe orders and rent reminders. It was from Leora. "I tried," it read simply. "They said it's better this way." Better for whom? Alex didn't cry. He didn't even take a ragged breath. He just sat there letting the ache settle somewhere deep in the hollow space where names used to mean belonging. That afternoon, while wiping down sticky tables and refilling sugar dispensers, another message popped up, this time from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Kelsey, a girl he used to babysit with back in high school. "Hey stranger, just heard from Maya that you're living in Seattle now. Congrats on the big new job." Seattle. Alex stared at the text, a sharp twist in his gut. That's what they were telling people, that he'd gotten a fancy job, that he was too busy to grace their precious wedding with his presence. No mention of his father's public humiliation, no acknowledgement of his name, being casually erased from their family narrative. Just she's busy, convenient, clean, forgettable. They were rewriting his story again without him. He laughed, a short, humorless sound, not because it was funny, but because it was so utterly predictably them. That night, he walked 4 blocks in the persistent drizzle to a pawn shop with faded signage and a bell that stubbornly refused to ring upon entry. In a dusty corner beneath a cracked guitar case and a wobbly lamp sat a camera. Old, heavy reel. The guy behind the counter barely glanced up when Alex inquired about it. $50. Lens works. No returns, sold. He took it back to the quiet of the closed cafe and snapped his first photo, just. The rain-slicked dock, one lone seagull perched precariously on a bent post. He saved the image to the tiny memory card and renamed the file Uninvited, JPEG. Something in his chest shifted. It didn't magically fix everything, didn't erase the group chat or the carefully constructed lies, but it was his image, his lens, his truth. He went back to his small room above the bar and stared at the photo on the tiny display screen until the battery died. He wasn't busy. He was discarded. That night, he texted Leora a single stark line. "Tell them I'm not busy. I just don't belong." Then he set the phone down, turned out the light, and let the distant hum of the town lull him into a restless sleep. He didn't belong there. The moment Alex pushed through the cafe's glass door and saw his father sitting near the front, alone, elbows braced on the table, fingers curled around a chipped mug, a cold dread washed over him. The fragile quiet he'd painstakingly built for himself was about to shatter. The sun hadn't even cleared the low rooftops yet, and the regulars hadn't begun their morning shuffle. But there he was, claiming space, like he still had dominion over Alex's very existence. His father didn't smile. Neither did Alex. He kept walking behind the counter, pretending it was any other ordinary morning, as if his father hadn't driven hundreds of miles just to drag him back into the suffocating orbit he'd finally escaped. Arrow glanced up from the coffee grinder, her gaze sharp and knowing. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. A subtle lift of her eyebrow was enough for Alex to know she was watching quietly, ready if he needed an exit. His father cleared his throat, the sound deep and deliberate. "You've made your point," he stated, not even attempting a veneer of civility. "Now come home." Alex grabbed a cleaning rag, deliberately slow, and made a show of wiping down the already spotless countertop. His voice, when it finally came, was surprisingly steady. "You don't get to summon me." "I'm not here to argue," his father countered, his voice rising with barely suppressed anger. "No," Alex said, his eyes locking with his father's. "You're here to remind me what I owe you." His father stood up abruptly, gesturing towards the narrow hallway leading to the back. "We're not doing this out here." Alex nodded, a grim acceptance settling over him, and led his father to the cramped space near the walk-in fridge, where their strained words wouldn't be easily overheard. The air back there was colder. Or maybe that was just the chill that had settled deep in Alex's bones. His father turned his voice low and sharp. "You made a scene." Alex laughed, a quiet, bitter sound. "You mean when you announced to a few hundred people that I was some stray you picked up?" His father didn't flinch. "It was a joke. It was a knife." Alex countered, his voice unwavering. "You've used my silence for decades. Not anymore." His father scowled, his face contorted with a familiar blend of anger and wounded pride. "This family is falling apart without you. The kids need watching Maya's drowning. You walking out like this, it's selfish." "No." Alex said the word firm and resolute. "It's self-preservation." His father stared at him for a long, tense moment. And for the first time in Alex's memory, he thought he saw a flicker of understanding in his father's eyes. A dawning realization that Alex wasn't bluffing. He wasn't the ever-available helper anymore. Not the unpaid nanny, the on-call fixer, the convenient scapegoat for everyone else's messes. "You'll regret this," his father finally spat out, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. "No." Alex repeated the word, a quiet promise to himself. "I won't." He stepped around his father and walked back to the front, his spine ramrod straight, his breath surprisingly steady. Arrow handed him a fresh pot of coffee, her gaze conveying a silent understanding, a kind of respect that didn't need words. His father didn't follow. He sat for another 5 minutes, finished his bitter coffee, and left without a backward glance. Alex didn't watch him go. The rest of the shift unfolded in a slow, deliberate exhale. Every dish he cleared, every cup he rinsed, felt like washing away decades of someone else's entitlement. He wasn't lighthearted, but he was undeniably lighter. That evening, the narrow stairs to his room above the bar seemed steeper than usual, his shoulders aching with more than just the day's work. The moment he reached the landing, he saw it. A padded envelope tucked against the doorframe. No name, no return address. He didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Inside, nestled against the soft padding, he found a photograph, Maya's daughter, 5 years old, in a bright red jumper and glittery shoes, clutching the teddy bear Alex had given her last Christmas. Her smile was lopsided, innocent, completely unaware of the manipulative games her mother played. Beneath the photo, a short, carefully penned note. "She asked for you today. I told her you were tired. We're tired too, Cal. Come back and fix this." Not a single word about what had transpired. No apology, just the familiar emotional bait wrapped in the sweetness of a child's smile and the heavy weight of familial guilt. Fix this. Like I broke it. Alex sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the photograph trembling in his hand, not from weakness, but from a deep, simmering anger. He studied the note until the words blurred, then flipped the photo over and wrote one word in stark, capital letters. He placed it back in the envelope and slid it under the bed behind a stack of old notebooks. He didn't need to send it. He just needed to say it to someone, to himself. The silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was whole. Later that night, he retrieved his camera and walked down to the deserted dock. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting dramatic streaks of burnt orange across the still water. The tide lapped gently at the weathered pylon, slow and steady. He snapped a photo of the empty pier. No people, no distractions, just the way the vibrant sky seemed to fold into the dark, silent sea. He titled it, "I Don't Owe You My Peace." Then he uploaded it. Not to spite anyone, not to ignite a war, but simply because it was true. His photo, the one of the dock bathed in the fiery hues of twilight, wasn't intended for a wide audience, just a handful of friends who understood his quiet departures. But in less than 24 hours, strangers were leaving comments that resonated with a painful familiarity. "This is exactly how I felt when my dad left. I wish I had her courage." Some called it haunting, others called it healing. Alex hadn't planned on saying anything publicly, but maybe silence was just another way they'd trained him to disappear. So when Oren, a retired photography teacher who ran weekend classes out of the local community center, emailed him, Alex almost didn't open it. The subject line read, "Your voice deserves walls." Inside, Oren invited him to show his work at a local exhibit the following weekend. No theme, no resume needed, just the raw truth. Alex replied with a simple, "Yes," not for attention, not for revenge, but for the oxygen it offered his stifled spirit. He titled the series Framed Out, a phrase that encapsulated every unsaid word, every swallowed emotion of his life. He printed 5 photographs, each one a silent testament to a different kind of wound. The first, a dimly lit dining room, a long table set for 6, with one chair conspicuously empty. No caption. Just the potent silence. The second, a stark silhouette of a woman standing alone outside a brightly lit house window, while blurred figures inside danced under strings of festive lights. Her face was obscured, but the palpable ache in her posture spoke volumes. The third was a stark close-up of an old childhood photo of Alex at 9. Someone had carelessly scratched across his face years ago, rendering him almost unrecognizable, and no one had ever bothered to replace the print. That felt brutally honest now, so he left it that way. The other 2 images were more recent, one of a hesitant hand reaching towards a closed doorknob, frozen mid-action. The last, and his personal favorite, a pair of worn boots standing at the very edge of the vast, indifferent sea, unmoving, defiant. Opening night was a modest affair, folding chairs, paper cups of cheap wine. Local folks who knew each other too well to be easily impressed. But when people reached Alex's small wall of photographs, they didn't just glance and move on. They lingered. A woman whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "This one. This is exactly what my mother did to me." A teenage boy with chipped nail polish stared intently at the defaced childhood photo and murmured to his friend. That's how it felt when they left. And Alex stood quietly near the corner, clutching his worn camera bag like a shield, feeling seen for the first time, not by the people who had raised him, but by those who had survived their own forms of erasure. The next morning, a local blog reposted one of his pieces under the stark headline, "The Forgotten Daughter," and that's when everything subtly shifted. The messages began to pour in. Not just fleeting likes or shares, but heartfelt emails, direct messages, even handwritten letters from complete strangers. "Thank you for showing this. You gave me a voice. My family pretended I didn't exist after I came out. You made me feel less alone." It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. But peace, Alex had learned, was a fragile commodity in his world. 2 days later, he saw them again. His father and a man in a sharp navy suit were parked in a nondescript car across the street from the cafe. His father's arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his face a mask of grim determination, while the other man's eyes coldly scanned the storefront. Alex didn't venture outside Arrow, ever observant. Caught his gaze and raised a questioning eyebrow. Alex shook his head once slowly. "If they ask for me, I am not here. They didn't come in, they just waited." When they finally drove away, Arrow handed Alex a thick envelope they'd left behind. "No note," she said, her voice neutral. "But the other guy gave me his card. Said you'd know what to do." Inside, nestled amongst official-looking documents, was a legal declaration form. If Alex signed it, he would be voluntarily relinquishing any and all claim to family inheritance or property retroactively. No lawyer was listed on his behalf. Just a blank line for his signature and the ominous phrase to avoid future familial dispute. So this was their next tactic. They weren't just writing him out of their story, they were trying to burn the very page he'd been written on. Alex took the envelope upstairs that night, setting it on the small scarred desk beneath the window. He didn't touch it for a long while, just stared at the stark white paper. Then he reached for his camera. He photographed the letter. No edits, no filters, just the cold, hard reality of it. He uploaded it with a simple caption. "If I never belonged, why are they still trying to make it official?" He left it up for 5 minutes. That was long enough. It had already been seen, already saved, already passed along like a quiet flare in the darkness. Then he deleted it. Some things aren't meant to live forever online. But some truths don't disappear just because you click a button. He sat in front of the small cracked mirror after that legs folded beneath him, face bare. He looked older, not necessarily tired, but defined. His jawline seemed sharper, his gaze steadier. They were done pretending he was family. Good, because he was finally done pretending he needed them to be whole. He reached for his camera again, the worn strap soft against his skin. "If they can't define me," he whispered to his reflection, "then I'll show them who I really am." The first message hit his inbox before sunrise. "Is this you?" it read. Followed by a blurry video thumbnail. Alex didn't recognize the name. Just a generic profile photo of a sunset and a user handle he'd never seen. He hesitated for a long moment before clicking. And then the screen loaded. There he was, outside the cafe, locked in a tense, bitter standoff with his father. The angle was crooked, undoubtedly shot through the grimy, cracked blinds of the storage room window. His own voice echoed back at him, too clear for comfort. "You just pretended I mattered, until I didn't." That line, raw and exposed, sliced through the air like a blade. It was him, but not the carefully constructed version of himself he ever wanted strangers to meet first. The video was posted in a local community Facebook group, Coastal Watchers Astoria area. The inflammatory caption read, "Local woman berates her elderly father after he drives hours to reconcile." The comments section erupted, a digital battleground of assumptions and judgments. Some were dripping with sanctimonious sympathy for his father. "She sounds so ungrateful. He just wanted to talk. What kind of daughter speaks like that?" You can practically hear the entitlement in her voice. Others thankfully saw beyond the carefully cropped narrative. "Y'all don't know what went down before this clip. She doesn't owe him forgiveness just because he's older." But regardless of which side they landed on, everyone had an opinion, and Alex's name was now pinned to a public wall, a target for their collective judgment. Arrow didn't mention the video the next morning, neither did Oren. But the way they looked at him, their gazes softer, more deliberate, spoke volumes. At noon, while restocking oat milk, Oren rounded the corner and simply asked, "You okay?" Alex wanted to say yes, but he wasn't entirely sure anymore. How to be okay and visible at the same time. He nodded a small, uncertain gesture. Getting there. After work, he sat on the back steps of the building, trying to breathe through the relentless noise on his phone. He scrolled mindlessly, watching his name tagged again and again in the digital fray. Then a voicemail notification blinked onto his screen. It was Aunt Janelle, her voice carrying its usual syrupy sweetness, laced with just enough subtle judgment to curdle it. "Hey, sweetheart, I know you've got a lot going on, but I was surprised you didn't RSVP to Maya's wedding. Everyone thought you were coming. Maya said you must have just decided not to. Hope you're well." Alex froze, the casual dismissal hitting him like a physical blow. He had never received an invitation, not by email, not by mail, not even a curt text message. He frantically pulled up his inbox and searched every conceivable term. Maya wedding invitation, RSVP, nothing. Not a single word. They hadn't forgotten. They had deliberately erased the invitation entirely. So when he hadn't shown up, it looked like a conscious choice, an act of abandonment on his part. They hadn't just set him up to be excluded that day. They had meticulously planned the narrative that would explain his absence, and everyone had swallowed it whole. The rage came slow, a creeping heat under his skin. He didn't yell, didn't cry, just sat perfectly still, a cold fury solidifying within him. Then he opened a blank folder on his laptop and named it Erased. Remembered inside, he began to drop the photos he'd taken, but never shared. One of an empty wedding table, the white tablecloth, stark under the soft lighting. Another of a single chair, pulled slightly out. A silent invitation that was never extended. A third of a thrift store RSVP card he'd found months ago, left deliberately unsigned. A fourth of a cracked mirror, the silvered surface fractured clean through the middle, reflecting only the indifferent sky. Each image was quiet, understated, but in his mind they screamed. He almost hit publish on a scathing post, complete with screenshots of his fruitless invitation searches and the damning voicemail transcript. He wanted to burn their carefully constructed lies to the ground with irrefutable proof. But he paused, his finger hovering over the post button. He closed the tab. Instead, he kept building the gallery. They had weaponized their version of the truth to paint him as ungrateful, angry, difficult. He wouldn't descend to their level, wouldn't try to shout louder. He would frame the deafening silence they had imposed and let that speak instead. The next morning, he uploaded just one image from the growing folder. A wide shot of a wedding banquet hall. The long white table, meticulously set candles flickering in elegant holders. Plates piled high with untouched food. And one chair, his chair conspicuously missing from the end. The stark caption read, "I never declined. I was never invited. I wasn't missing, you erased me. That chair wasn't empty by accident. It was a message, and I'm done pretending I hadn't received it." After everything, the lies, the gaslighting, the edited memories, he realized there was only one thing left to say. So he said it in the only language they couldn't twist or rewrite. He uploaded the photo set at midnight. No individual captions on the images themselves, just a single stark post with the hashtag Forgotten Daughter. I was always there. You just looked past me. There was no grand plan, no expectation of a viral sensation. He simply needed to expel it to release the suffocating weight, but by morning it had already begun. Notifications flooded his phone before he'd even managed his first cup of coffee. Strangers from every corner of the country were sharing the post, their own stories echoing in the comments. Some simply left strings of hearts, fire emojis, or variations of this, all of this. By noon, a local reporter had requested a quick interview. "Your piece hits," she'd said over the phone, her voice earnest. "It's not about anger, it's about being invisible. That's what's resonating with people." It wasn't fame he sought, not revenge. It was recognition. A strange, full-bodied kind of quiet hummed under his skin. Then Maya texted, "So now the whole world knows you're angry. Happy now, Mom's embarrassed. Dad's furious. Please stop this." Alex stared at the screen, his heart thumping not with sadness, but with a cold, hard fury at her utter lack of comprehension. The second message hit harder. Forwarded message. "Family dinner Saturday. No cameras, just come, just come, just come." Like the past year hadn't been a brutal war zone. Like he was the one who had left a seat empty and never looked back. Like they hadn't systematically scrubbed him from every group photo and told distant relatives he was off chasing some phantom job. They wanted peace, sure, but only on their terms. No apologies. No acknowledgement of the truth, just a demand for a new performance. He typed a response, his fingers flying across the screen. "I'm not angry, I'm just done pretending we were ever something we weren't." He didn't send it. Instead, he walked down to the shoreline. The sea was choppy, a churning slate gray, the waves crashing against the rocks like a slow, relentless fury. He let the sound drown out the familiar whispers of self-doubt, let it hush the fragile parts of him that still craved their approval. He didn't go to the dinner Saturday evening, passed like any other. He worked the late shift at the cafe. Arrow, with a knowing glance, gave him a slice of warm peach pie to take home. He ate it standing by the open window of his small room, the cool breeze cutting through the lingering tension in his thoughts. Later that night, a friend from high school sent him a screenshot. Maya had posted a group photo of the peaceful family dinner. The caption was saccharine, "So good to be together." Alex counted the faces, 12. One chair was conspicuously empty. The top comment, blunt and unforgiving, read, "Where's your daughter?" Maya deleted the post within minutes, but not before hundreds of people had seen it. Alex didn't comment, didn't repost. He simply closed the app, deleted his entire social media account, and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, there was no ache behind his ribs. No desperate itch to explain himself. He printed one photo, the same stark image from his small exhibit. The wedding banquet hall, the long table, the single chair, pushed slightly out. He framed it, wrote a simple caption on the mat board. "I was never missing, you just never looked." Then he sealed it in plain brown wrapping paper and mailed it to his parents' house. No return address, no note. Let them decide what to do with it. Let them finally feel the weight of the silence he had carried for so long. That should have been the end. A quiet, defiant period at the close of a painful chapter. But someone else wasn't ready to let go. The letter arrived late one afternoon, slipped beneath his door like a whispered secret carried on the wind. The envelope was soft off-white. The address handwritten in Leora's familiar, round, hesitant script. Just his name, no last name, no return address, just Cal. He didn't open it right away. He let it sit on the worn counter while he made a cup of tea, wiped down the already clean kitchen sink, rearranged the same 3 paperbacks on his small shelf. When he finally slid his finger beneath the seal, a quiet premonition settled over him. This wasn't another guilt trip, another manipulative plea cloaked in false nostalgia. The note inside was small, folded twice. It said only this: "They pretend it's easier not to mention you, but I remember you every day and I don't want that to feel wrong anymore." There was no comeback, no "we miss you," no exhaustive checklist of his supposed transgressions. Just a simple, unwavering honesty that undid him in the quietest way. He sat on the edge of his bed, rereading the short note until the edges softened from the warmth of his hands. That night, the small gallery was filled with hushed voices and slow, contemplative steps. It was the final exhibition of Framed Out, a poignant blend of the stark images from his initial series and new work inspired by the raw beauty of the Oregon coast. Fishing boats half submerged in swirling fog, empty swings swaying gently in the wind, wind-bent trees silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky. Each image carried a subtle whisper of absence, a quiet echo of what was missing. Alex stood off to the side, letting people drift past, pretending he wasn't subtly scanning the small crowd for a face he didn't even know he was hoping to see. Near the end of the evening, a woman appeared, tall, with silver hair, pulled back in a precise knot, her thin hands clasped at her waist. She stopped in front of the photograph titled "Inheritance," a lone figure standing outside a brightly lit house in the pouring rain. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't take a brochure, just stood and looked, a profound sadness etched on her face. When Alex tentatively approached her, she turned, met his eyes for a fleeting second, then walked out into the night before he could utter a single word. The gallery assistant, a young woman with kind eyes, came over and murmured, "She told me she knew your mother, said there were things she should have said a long time ago." Alex didn't chase after her. He didn't need to. Whatever long-held secrets she carried weren't his to unlock. But it meant something. Knowing that someone else had seen, had wondered, maybe had wanted to speak up all those years ago and hadn't. Back in his small apartment, the floor still vibrated faintly from the bass thumping through the bar below. But he didn't mind anymore. He learned to live with the noise both inside and out. He had clients now, his photography finding its own quiet audience online. He hosted a weekly art circle for teenagers who didn't quite fit into the neat little boxes their parents had drawn for them. They painted, they talked, and sometimes they just existed together without the need for explanation. He didn't chase healing anymore. He was slowly, deliberately building it. One rainy afternoon, he finally opened the small box he'd been avoiding. Inside lay the brittle adoption papers. The edges of the childhood photographs still slightly charred Leora's simple, heartfelt note. He held them not with the familiar ache of the past, but with a newfound sense of agency, choosing what he wanted to carry forward. He took the adoption paper out back behind the building, placed it carefully inside a cracked terracotta pot, and struck a match. The small flame was clean contained. It curled the fragile edges of the paper like a slow exhale, then turned everything to soft gray ash. That wasn't denial, it was release. Later, he sat by his small window, watching the harbor lights blink back at him. Amber reflections dancing on the rippling water. In the distance, gulls coasted low, skimming the edges of everything. People would always say he walked away, but the truth was far simpler. He just stopped standing still. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is walk away from the version of family that breaks us and build a life where we finally feel whole. Calder's journey wasn't about revenge or demanding recognition. It was about the quiet, arduous process of reclaiming the fragmented pieces of himself that had been buried under layers of silence, guilt, and roles he never chose. He didn't win by shouting louder. He won by being unflinchingly honest with himself and eventually with the world. And maybe that's the most valuable lesson here. You don't have to keep returning to a place where you weren't loved simply because it's where you came from. Your voice, your truth deserves to be heard, even if it means creating your own space to speak it. So let me ask you, have you ever felt erased by your own family? Have you ever been pressured to maintain a false peace at the cost of your own voice? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's create a space where those often unheard stories can finally be acknowledged. And if Calder's story resonated with you even in the smallest way, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful real-life inspired stories every week, because here your voice finally gets to matter.